Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Timur Kizriev of Seymour Jizriev, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you between two big pods with a little pod. Last week, Sod All was going on, so I did an hour and a half Q&A with the Patreon boys. Some fantastic questions. If you've not listened to that, go over there and have a gander. We talked everything from elbow setups to Baldur's Gate 3. And then this coming weekend, we got UFC 310, which is pretty good looking, I'd say. If I walked past that, I'd do a little double take, and the woman I was with would give me that face from the meme. So we'll be talking about that on the Boycast this week, Wednesday maybe, Thursday. You got Asakura versus Pantoja, which is a banger. You got Shavkat versus Gary, which is two undefeated prospects at welterweight, with varying degrees of hype and likability. And you got a load of other good stuff on that card too. So yeah, loads to talk about. Today, we're doing a little pod on something peculiar that happened. PFL had a good event. Now, you may know PFL from hiring Francis Ngannou and then letting him box twice before actually getting him in the MMA cage, and then putting his fight on pay-per-view behind a paywall where no one saw it. Or perhaps you know them for not allowing elbows. Or perhaps you know them for buying up Bellator and then not actually giving any of their fighters fights. This is a trick that's actually getting pretty common this sort of year, last year too. The one that fight companies have worked out: hire the fighters, announce you've hired the fighters, don't offer them any fights. It's genius. Mind you, if you do the maths, the UFC physically doesn't have enough slots on enough cards to offer to actually have each fighter have 3 fights a year, as they're contractually obliged to offer them. So, there's a factored in, like, lots of people are going to be injured. But One and PFL seem to have mastered the infinite money glitch, or at least the infinite hype without paying your fighters glitch. But PFL do a season format, which every other promotion looks at and goes, no, not for us, thanks. That's the reason they don't allow elbows in their fights, because there's a quick turnaround from one fight to the next, and elbows open up big cuts, which are hard to get past commissions. But every year they do the finals, where they do the final of each tournament, and that's a 5-round fight. And on this card, they did not only the finals of the season, they did the finals of the European season and the Middle Eastern season. So 16 fights were booked, a possible 70 rounds of action, and everyone who was going to give it a watch or was like interested in the results went in with the expectation that this was going to be probably pretty hard work. And for once, it came off. Everyone was winning fights quickly or getting smoked quickly. They were banging through these fights. They had a random concert in the middle that they paid some guy millions of dollars to do, and it's just like another way for PFL to spend money on things that don't attract people or give views or buys. But the actual fights were banging. So we're going to go down and we'll talk about some of the guys who, because anyone who is winning a PFL tournament, they may not jump into the UFC and become champion, but they are good enough that they can hang there. And I would hope, in the age of Charles Oliveira picking up like 10 losses in the UFC before becoming champion in the deepest and most talented division in the UFC, we're over the he lost once, lol, would not hang in the UFC nonsense. So the one that's attracted loads of attention, for good reason, is Dakota Ditcheva. She fought Tyler Santos in the finals of the women's flyweight tournament. Ditcheva has, even in these tournaments, the tournament structure sort of encourages people to pick up a quick knockout first, because then you get a quick six, you score 6 points, and then diminishing number of points for when the round that you got to finish in was, and then, if you win by decision, you get the least points, unless you lose, of course. But then you got the playoffs, and because the turnaround from the playoffs is almost immediate, well, no, it's not immediate, it's like 2 months until the finals, the playoffs are dire. If you watch Dovlet Yagshimuradov versus Rob Wilkinson, you'll have forgotten it because it was terrible. But there's just there's no reason to take risks in that fight, because you're not going to get more points for winning quickly, and you want to be healthy to fight in the final. But Dakota Ditcheva, in the tournament and in the playoffs, she just smoked these lasses. She's got 13 wins, 1 decision. And Tyler Santos was a big step up, because Tyler Santos was in the UFC. She got a title shot at Valentina Shevchenko. She almost beat Valentina Shevchenko, and Shevchenko won that fight by, well, I won't say it's deliberate, but there was a headbutt that broke Tyler Santos' orbital, which is more than just swelling your eye. That's bad. Broken orbital. People have just tapped out to broken orbitals plenty of times. Josh Barnett versus Mirko Krokop. I think Sakuraba did against Mirko Krokop. Bob Sapp got his orbital broken by Mirko Krokop. Dude was good at breaking eye sockets. But anyway, it was the kind of fight where, because it was razor close, and the underdog almost won, and it was a title fight, and there was some suspect activity that allowed the champion to pull through and win, in a sensible world, that would be a rematch. But the UFC were trying to push Valentina Shevchenko as an unbeatable force, and they were like, well, why would we want her winning a close decision or losing a close decision in a rematch? No one cares about Tyler Santos. So they had Tyler Santos fight Erin Blanchfield, and they basically just put Tyler Santos on ice for the rest of her UFC run. So Tyler Santos left, went to PFL. We were kind of rooting for her to win the $1 million because she did get screwed by the UFC. But Dakota Ditcheva blew her out of the water in a way that I've never seen anyone do to Tyler Santos. She stopped all her takedowns. She got up off the floor when she was taken down the first time. And then she beat her up on the feet. And her striking is really very interesting. She does a lot of switch hitting, but she does a lot of like enter orthodox, step out the side door into southpaw, and then when Tyler Santos followed her, she'd kick her in the body or knee her in the body or throw the head kick. And it was giving Tyler Santos fits. She was throwing front kicks to the face, and Tyler Santos just couldn't deal with them. And then left hooks to the body. She's finished a couple of asses by body shots in her run, but she's along the fence with Tyler Santos. She turns over an elbow from the clinch, which is the first legal elbow I think she's thrown in the PFL because they allowed them for this event and only the tournament finals, which is another great PR move. Make a big post about how you're allowing elbows. Bury in there that it's just for tournament finals, so it's not even every fight on this card. And when we have the next card, none of them will be using elbows then either. But she turns over an elbow and then she comes back with a body shot with the left hook, and Tyler Santos doubles over basically in tears, which is the power of the body shot. I mean, go watch Randy Couture versus Brandon Vera. There's loads of examples, but a body shot, people who are extremely tough, people who have had their orbital bones shattered and then carried on fighting for 2 rounds, their body just shuts down and they go fetal. They can't do anything about it. And what I really liked was Ditcheva hit her with a body shot, and then instead of trying to tee off on her head when she bent over in like a crouch, she just kept hitting her in the kidney, which is brutal. So very impressed by Ditcheva. People have been talking about her before this. I'd seen one of her fights, I think it was. Might have been the Hackett one. I knew she'd finished a lot of lasses, but this was a very obvious step up in terms of competition. Not just because like Tyler Santos has been in the UFC, but Tyler Santos was inches from being the best in the world, and Tyler Santos has a lot more fights than any of the other women that Ditcheva has fought. You know, she's 22-2, or was coming into this fight, and Ditcheva's opponents have all been like 4-1, 3-0, 5-4. So naturally, people are like, would love to see her against Valentina Shevchenko, because what else is there? You're going to do a 4th match against Grasso? And isn't it nice to have a woman who can actually crack people? Because Alexa Grasso's thing is boxing, and she still doesn't hurt anyone. So what else was there on this card? Shamil Musaev beat Umalatov. Umalatov was, I think, 2-time PFL tournament champion. So he'd already won 2 milli, or maybe 1 time. But Musaev has a ton of hype behind him. Very exciting, explosive striker. One thing I could not get over, everyone's banging roids. I'm fine with that. But Musaev has actually grown in like 5 years, because I watched some of his old fights in M1. In about 5 years, he's grown full tits. And it's really distracting when you're watching his fights. They came out to give him the belt and they put this special like champion shirt on him. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. I thought you guys were going to get taken off the air for indecency. But once you get past the knockers flapping around during the fight, he is slick as hell. The finish of this fight, he throws the overhand and then he goes and then he corners Umalatov along the fence and he goes inside slip, throws his right arm out enough that it flashes up in Umalatov's periphery and then comes back quick with the left hook. So he throws like half a right hand and then throws the left hook, catches him straight across the chin, knocks him out. Absolutely gorgeous punch. Very similar to something that Canelo does, and also something that Jersey Joe Walcott used to do, which is like, yes, if you're showing the shoulder fake, that should be enough to get the opponent reacting. But if they're, one, a little bit too slow, they're not picking up on the feint, or they're too, like, nerves of absolute steel and they're not respecting the feint, you can just, like, Canelo doesn't even act as if he's going to throw the right hand. He throws his right hand up like he's going, hello, over here, waving his hand. And then he hits him with a left hook to the body or the head. And Jersey Joe Walcott used to do the same thing. He'd slip inside the jab and throw his right hand out away from the opponent just to make them look at something before coming back with the left hook or the left uppercut that he knocked out Ezard Charles with. One of the best punches ever. My favourite punch of all time, I think. Most boxing people, it's the Ray Robinson, Gene Fullmer left hook going backwards. For the moustache-twirling hipster of historical boxing, it's the Jersey Joe Walcott Ezard Charles knockout. Go and watch it. It's phenomenal. But yeah, Musaev is another one who'd finished well, he got his decision in his last one, but he's been finishing people left, right, and centre. He actually ended up fighting Murad Ramazanov twice in this tournament, which is another weird one of how the tournaments shake out, because obviously in a tournament, even if everyone's trying to stay in shape to fight 4 times in a year, it's pretty hard to do. Think of how many fighters in the UFC actually are able to fight 3 or 4 times a year. Everyone is coming into this tournament with injuries, basically, because they're trying to get the $1 million. But even then, people have to pull out. So there's all kinds of like shift ups in the matchmaking. But that's always been the case in tournaments. If you watch like the great K1 tournaments, the great Pride tournaments, someone always gets injured. That's why it was so crazy when Sakuraba took on Royce Gracie in not the opening round, but the opening round of the one night section of the Pride 2000 Grand Prix. Gracie requested special rules with no time limits because he's a Gracie and they love doing that shit. And because they were pissed off about how Sakuraba had got technical submissions over Hoyler and Henzo, which is where you break someone's arm and the ref says, right, that's the fight finished. And they go, hey, I could have kept fighting. So Royce had all these special rules put in place. And the assumption was, and I believe Royce had told people this, like if he won in a long fight, he wouldn't have continued in the tournament. Sakuraba beat him in a 90-minute fight, the longest in MMA history, and then went into the next round the same night against Igor Vovchanchin, the number 1 ranked heavyweight in the world, which is insane. And he lost that one, obviously, but man. And at the end of the fight, you can see how impressed Igor Vovchanchin is, like that Sakuraba even made it that far. Anyway, sorry, history lesson there in the middle of this podcast. But yeah, tournaments always shake out weird. I think that's part of the magic of a one-night tournament. In a season format over the course of a year, it's kind of annoying. We were talking about Impa Kasanganay as a perfect example of someone who gained more by going to the PFL than he would have staying in the UFC. He had a great run through 2023. He fought like 5 times in the year, was undefeated, and then he beat Josh Silveira, son of Conan Silveira, another Sakuraba connection, but also head coach of ATT, in the finals. And then he had a super fight with Johnny Eblen, the Bellator middleweight champion, because Impa Kasanganay is fighting a light heavyweight, but he's basically a middleweight. They don't have a middleweight tournament. And he lost a split decision that was bullshit against Johnny Eblen, so he'd beaten the best guy in Bellator as well. So he beat 3 guys this year, got Dovlet Yagshimuradov in the final. I've had eyes on Yagshimuradov since he beat Batraz Agneyev. I did a prospect watch piece years ago on the Fight Primer about Batraz Agneyev because he was this 4-0 light heavyweight who just smashed Thiago Silva after he left the UFC. But he was the ACB, I believe they were ACB at the time and now they're ACA, the big Russian org. He was their light heavyweight champion by 4 fights into his career. I was like, holy shit, this guy, he was getting some traction. And then Dovlet Yagshimuradov, as a sort of like journeyman, comes in and beats him and basically ruined Agneyev's career. Agneyev he went from 4-0 to 5-3 and hasn't fought in like 3 years. But Yagshimuradov's gone to American Top Team. He's added some really nice wrestling. His head outside single was a big one in the tournament this year. But he also, he's a light heavyweight who throws up wheel kicks and shit. He's got a great outside slip to right hand, Roberto Duran's best punch. And in this one, Impa Kasanganay just blitzed in on him with a 1-2-1 or whatever it was, and Yagshimuradov just slipped to his right and then came back with the overhand and knocked him out, or TKO'd him. 58 seconds, and, gets $1 million out of it. I mean, it was 4 fights over the course of a year, which is grueling, but I was really impressed with him this year. He also has some really nice spinning back fists. He bounces in and out, and he goes onto his back foot as if to retreat, and then he throws himself forward into a spinning back fist, and he chins people coming forward. Would he be top 10 in the UFC? Is he a man over 205 pounds who can throw a punch? There's a good chance he would be. Gadzi Rabadanov beat Brent Primus, which is sad because Brent Primus, obviously, he took Usman Nurmagomedov's perfect record. Brent Primus got styled on by Usman Nurmagomedov, and then it got changed to a no contest because Usman Nurmagomedov took some drugs, which we were later told was medicine, but there's never been anything to back that up aside from Mike Kogan's word. And in the same sentence, Mike Kogan said Brent Primus will 100% get a rematch, and then he didn't. So how much do we have to trust your previous statement? But Brent Primus has never been that great and is kind of washed. However, I saw someone saying like he only had a fluke win over Michael Chandler. Don't get it twisted. He calf kicked Michael Chandler, and Michael Chandler, his leg went to sleep. It was 3 years before people were ready to talk about calf kicks. But he did beat Michael Chandler fair and square. And then he got laid on in the rematch because when Michael Chandler loses one, it was certainly in his Bellator run, it was like, right, we're taking him down into closed guard along the fence and we're not doing fuck all. He's since upgraded to, I'm going to try and hit this guy in the back of the head 30 times. But anyway, Primus got taken down a bunch by Rabanov. It was very weird watching Primus because he looked like he was punching through treacle. Had his elbows wide, like the famous clip of famous gif of some guys in a UFC crowd shadowboxing with their elbows out like they're playing the fucking trombone or something, jerking off a line of men in front of them. So Primus is throwing these weird-ass punches like that, and then he gets taken down a few times. Head outside single because that's the meta right now. But I thought it was very interesting because every time he got taken down, Rabadanov had his hands on the mat. That's a thing that happens all the time in MMA, but in jiu-jitsu it's like, don't put your hands on the mat because you get overhooked. And that allows them to start playing some kind of guard, walk-up triangles. If they're weird, rubber guard. Turns out Brent Primus is weird. Started rubber guarding him. And he almost did well with it. He kept passing the head off, threatened a go-go platter at one point. But yeah, every time they hit the mat, he was able to pull his legs up and start rubber guarding. And while he didn't get a submission at any point or a sweep, it did mean that Rabadanov couldn't really hit him on the ground. Unfortunately, Rabadanov beat him up on the feet. He was much quicker, and then as the rounds went on, it became much worse. By round 3, Brent Primus is just sort of like, he'd throw punches and Rabadanov would back off, but you'd go, I think if you stood there, nothing would have happened. It would have made the squeaky dog toy sound if his fists hit you. So he looked good, Rabadanov. I'd not seen his previous fights, but it is sad that Primus is so washed, but he almost got the $1 million. If ifs and buts were candy and nuts, we would know what Usman Nurmagomedov took. But Primus actually beat Mansour Barnoohi a couple of fights ago because Barnoohi got into like take me down and I'll try and do some stupid headlocks from bottom side control, which I've heard called like the Hawaiian headlock, the goth lock. There's a few things it's been called. It is a thing that you can catch people by surprise with, but Mansour Barnoohi spent 2 fights, that one and the JJ Wilson fight, just trying this bullshit side control escape. It's like, why don't you put more emphasis on not getting taken down, Mansour? But Mansour actually, he fought Alfie Davis on the undercard to this one, and I only got to see the end because the prelims were on like something that I don't have. And apparently he just saw red in the 3rd round because Alfie Davis is a pretty good striker, and Mansour Barnoohi is a very sloppy striker but an aggressive striker. Mansour Barnoohi has not really developed much since the Islam Makhachev fight, where Islam Makhachev has developed a lot. But he has always been like, go forward and try and rough the guy up. And if you watch the Islam Makhachev fight, Barnoohi beats him up in the clinch. Like, Islam will throw him, he'll get back up in like a half guard sweep attempt, and then he'll get right back to kneeing Islam in the body, grabbing the double collar ties and trying to knee him in the head. He just beat the piss out of Alfie Davis in this last round. Still getting blasted on the way back because he doesn't really have any defense, but man, I love Mansour Barnoohi, and then he got the rear naked choke. The heavyweights was weird because Oleg Popov took down Denis Goltsov like he did against Linton Vassell, and where Linton Vassell got up 100 times and then got taken down along the fence again, with no real damage being done, Goltsov said, I'm going to try a triangle. And it succeeded. And he put him to sleep, which was very impressive. And then the main event was Timur Khizriev versus Brendan Loughnane. Loughnane is another great example of a guy who the UFC passed on him off the Contender Series. He won a unanimous decision over Bill Algeo, who of course now is in the UFC. And the UFC passed on him, so he went to the to PFL, won the tournament in 2022, won a milli, knocked out Marlon Moraes, lost to Jesus Pinedo mid-2023, came back and won 3 fights, got into the final here against Khizriev. Khizriev has looked very good. He's 17-0. He's unbeaten. Did win the split over Gabriel Braga in his last one. I watched that one. It was quite interesting. But Loughnane tried a back kick right off the bat, and Khizriev did what Hayato Sakurai used to do, just duck under the spin kick, which is real dangerous. But if you get it, it's like you just grab their standing leg and pull them off their feet. And so then he was on the top for the first round. And then the second round, he starts with the where you reach out and you slap the inside of the opponent's thigh. They pull it back to level and their head comes forward. So you throw the uppercut. So you slap inside the thigh and you throw the right uppercut. He breaks Lougnane's nose in half with that, and he's bleeding everywhere. And then he lands that a few more times throughout the fight, but he did one where he slapped the inside of the lead leg. Loughnane pulled his feet back to level. And as he slapped the inside of the leg, Khizriev spun into the back kick. That was gorgeous. Loughnane, however, kept trying to use the back kick to get himself out of bad situations. He'd like be losing around and he'd go, right, maybe I'll knock him out with the back kick. And then he'd spin for the back kick, and Khizriev would do the same thing again. He'd just duck under and get the standing leg. And that's like a free takedown into a pretty bad position. But yeah, Khizriev's striking looked really good in this one. And what I liked was kind of like that Umar Nurmagomedov performance against Corey Sandhagen. The striking started out with shots and fakes of shots into strikes. So like you wouldn't start a boxing match by slapping the inside of the opponent's thigh and throwing the uppercut. It's just silly. But when you establish the takedown as a threat, you can do that. And then once that's a threat, you can start building into more orthodox boxing and kickboxing. And then it keeps moving through phases, because if they forget about the takedowns, you can go back to the takedowns. And then once they're worried about the takedowns, you can go back to the inside slap of the leg and uppercut or wheel kick or whatever. So it was really interesting to watch that. I thought that was really good. So the PFL, obviously in financial dire straits. Can they keep doing $1 million tournaments? Not if no one watches them. But I am always glad to see these fighters who are really good fighters get some money that they're actually due. It was announced this week that the purse between Fury and Usyk for their rematch, and I already have Tyson Fury fatigue, as you know, but they're gonna split $190 million between them. And even if they were running that event at a loss, which they're probably not, that's insane. That's, probably about 10 times the total payout for all fighters on the UFC cards in 2024. The money's there. Money is there to pay these people more. It's not that paying them more removes their hunger or whatever. Canelo has fought twice a year like clockwork, while earning at one point $1 million for every day of the year. He was on a $365 million a year contract at one point. And people will complain about his recent opposition, picking Charlo was a weird one, and whoever he beat in the last one. But until very recently, he was doing weird stuff like going all the way up to light heavyweight, fighting Kovalev, Bivol. The silk sheets and nice pajamas were not discouraging him from doing great things and putting on great shows. And this was a great show, in spite of everything, in spite of PFL being the worst run brand in combat sports. So if you have the chance, go and give it a watch, because these fights absolutely slapped. And even if everything the PFL has done this year has been really stupid decision-making wise, you do have to support them when the fights are good, or you should. Anyway, I'll be back on Thursday for the Boycast to talk about this UFC 310 card. I am one of the people who's seen Kai Asakura's fights, so I'm already doing better than Daniel Cormier will do in the fight. But yeah, there's loads to talk about. I think this is a really interesting occurrence. Having an outside champion come in and challenge for the UFC belt, I like it. They're doing it because he's already beaten, he's 9-0 against the top 5, Pantoja. But I love it. I think it's great. And Shavkat and Gary, there's lots to say about both those guys. So, yeah. Sign up to the Patreon to get in on that. FightPrimer.com to see anything I'm writing. And I'll be back next week for, episode 200 of the Jack Slack podcast? So party hats on, fellas. I'm your boy Jack Slack, ranking Dakota Ditcheva #1 in the world just cause. Bless.